Hello, guys. Welcome to Psyched Minds. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe, like, and share. We are reading Demian by Hermann Hesse. Chapter 2 Cain. Deliverance from my troubles came from quite an unexpected quarter, and with it, something new entered into my life, which has up to the present day exercised a strong influence. A short time before we had a new boy at our Latin school. He was the son of a well to do widow who had moved to our town. He was in mourning and wore a crepe band round his sleeve. His form was above mine and he was several years older, but I soon began to take notice of him, as did all of us. This remarkable boy impressed one as being much older than he looked. He made on no one the impression of being a mere schoolboy. With us childish youngsters, he was as distant and as mature as a man, or rather as a gentleman. He was by no means popular, he took no part in the games, much less in the fooling. It was only the self conscious and decided tone which he adopted towards the masters that pleased the others. His name was Max Demian. One day it happened, as it occasionally did in our school, that for some cause or other another class was sent into our large schoolroom. It was Damien's form. We little ones were having biblical history, the big ones had to write an essay, while we were having the story of Cain and Abel knocked into us. I kept looking across at Damien, whose face fascinated me strangely, and saw his wise, bright, more than ordinary strong features bent attentively and thoughtfully over his task. He did not look at all like a schoolboy doing an exercise, but like a research worker solving a problem. I did not find him really agreeable. On the contrary, I had one or two little things against him. With me, he was too distant and superior. He was much too provokingly sure of himself, and the expression of his eyes was that of an adult, which children never like, rather sad with occasional flashes of scorn. Yet I could not resist looking at him. Whether I liked him or not, but the minute he looked in my direction, I looked away, somewhat frightened. If today I considered what he looked like as a schoolboy, I can say that he was in every respect different from the others and bore the stamp of a striking personality and therefore attracted attention. But at the same time, he did everything to prevent himself from being remarked. He bore and conducted himself like a disguised prince who finds himself among peasant boys and makes every effort to appear like them. He was behind me on the way home from school when the others had to run on. He overtook me and said, "Hello." Even his manner of greeting, although he imitated our schoolboy tone of voice, was polite and like that of a grown up person. "Shall we go a little way together?" he questioned in a friendly way. I was flattered and nodded. Then I described to him where I lived. "Oh, there," he said laughingly. "I know the house already. There is a remarkable work of art over your door which interested me at once." I did not guess immediately to what he was referring and was astonished that he seemed to know our house better than I did. There was indeed a sort of crest which served as a keystone over the arc of the door, but in course of time it had become faint and had often been painted over. As far as I knew, it had nothing to do with us or with our family. "I don't know anything about it," I said timidly. "It's a bird or something like it. It must be very old. They say that the house at one time belonged to the abbey." "Very likely," he nodded. "We'll have another good look at it. Such things are often interesting. It is a hawk, I think." We continued our way. I was considerably embarrassed. Suddenly Damien laughed as if something funny had struck him. "Oh, I was present at your lesson," he said with animation. "The story of Cain who carried the mark on his forehead, was it not? Do you like it?" Generally, I used not to like anything of all the things we had to learn, but I did not dare to say so. If it was as though a grown up person were talking to me, I said I liked the story very much. Damien tapped me on the shoulder. "No need to impose on me, old fellow. But the story is really rather remarkable. I think it is much more remarkable than most of the others we get at school. The master didn't say very much about it, only the usual things about God and sin, etc. But I believe," he broke off, smiled, and cushioned. "But does it interest you?" "Well," he continued, I think one can conceive the story of Cain quite differently. Most things we are taught are certainly quite true and right, but one can consider them all from a different standpoint from the masters, and most of them have a much better meaning than, for instance, we can't be quite content with the explanation given us with regard to this fellow Cain and the mark on his forehead. Don't you find it so too? It certainly might happen that he should kill one of his brothers in a quarrel. It is also possible that he should afterwards be afraid and have to come down a peg, but that he should be singled out into the bargain with a decoration for his cowardice, which protects him and strikes terror into everyone else, that is really rather odd. Certainly, I said, interested. The case began to interest me, but how else should one explain the story? It clapped me on the shoulder. He clapped me on the shoulder. Certainly. Quite simply, the essential fact and the point of departure of the story was the sign. Here was a man who had something in his face which terrified other people. They did not dare to molest him. He made a big impression on them, he and his children. Perhaps, or rather certainly, it was not really a sign on his forehead, like an office stamp. Things are not as simple as that in real life. I would sooner think it is something scarcely perceptible, of a peculiar nature, a little more intelligence and boldness in his look. One could explain that as one wished, in his look than people were accustomed to. This man had power, other people shrank from him. He had a sign, one could explain that as one wished, and one always wishes what is convenient and agrees with one's opinion. People were afraid of Cain's children, they had a sign, and so they explained the sign not as it really was, a distinction, but as the contrary. The fellow with the sign were said to be peculiar, and they were courageous as well. People with courage and character are always called peculiar by other people. That a race of fearless and peculiar men should rove about was very embarrassing, and so people attached a surname and a story to this race, in order to revenge themselves on it, in order to compensate themselves more or less for all the terror with which it had inspired them. Do you understand? Yes, that means to say then that Cain was not at all wicked, and the whole story in the Bible isn't really true. Yes and no, such ancient primitive stories are always true, but they have not always been recorded and explained in the proper manner. In short, I mean that Cain was a thundering good fellow and his story got attached to his name simply because people were afraid of him. The story was merely a report, something people might have said going in a gossiping way, and it was true in so far as Cain and his children did actually wear a sort of sign and were different from most people. I was much astonished. And do you believe then that the affair of the murder is absolutely untrue? I asked, much impressed. Not at all, it is certainly true. The strong man killed a weak one. One may doubt, of course, whether it was really his brother or not. It is not important, for in the end, all men are brothers. A strong man, then, has killed a weak one. Perhaps it was a deed of heroism, perhaps it was not. But in any case, the other weak people were terrified. They lamented and complained, and when they were asked, "Why don't you simply kill him as well?" they did not answer, "Because we are cowards." But they said instead, "You can't. He has a sign. God has singled him out. The humbug must have arisen something after his style. This style. Oh, I'm keeping you from going in. Goodbye then." He turned into Old Street and left me alone and more astonished than I had ever been before. Scarcely had he gone when everything that he had said seemed to me quite unbelievable. Cain, a noble fellow? Abel, a coward? Cain's sign, a distinction? It was absurd. It was blasphemous and infamous. What was God's part in the matter? Had he not accepted Abel's sacrifice? Did he not love Abel? Damien's story was nonsense. I suspected him of making fun of me and of wishing to mislead me, the devil of a clever fellow. And he could talk, but well, still I had never thought so much about any of the biblical or other stories before. And for some time past I had never so completely forgotten Frank Cromer for hours, for a whole evening. At home, I read through the story once again, as it stands in the Bible, short and clear. It was quite foolish to try to find a special secret meaning, if it had one. Every murderer could look upon himself as a favorite of God. No, it was nonsense. But Damien had a nice way of saying such things, so easily and pleasantly as if everything were self-evident. And then his eyes. My ideas are certainly a little upset, or rather, they were very much confused. I had lived in a bright, clean world. I myself had been a sort of Abel, and now I was firmly fixed in the other and had sunk so deeply, but really, what could I do to help it? What was my position now? A reminiscence glowed in me, which for the moment almost took away my breath. I remembered that wretched evening from which my present misery dated, when I looked for an instant into the heart of my father's bright world and despised his wisdom. Then I was Cain and bore the sign. I imagined that it was in no way shameful but a distinction, and in my wickedness and unhappiness I stood on a higher level than my father, higher than good and pious people. It was not in such a clear thinking way that my experience then presented itself to me, but all this was contained therein. It was only a flaming up to a feeling of strange emotions which caused me pain and yet filled me with pride. When I considered the matter, I saw how strangely Damien had spoken of the fearless and the cowards, how curiously he had explained the mark on Cain's forehead, how singularly his eyes had lit up, those peculiar eyes of a grown person, and indistinctly it shot through my brain. Is not he himself, this Damien, a sort of Cain? Why did he defend him, if he did not feel like him? Why had this force in his gaze? Why had he this force in his gaze? Why did he speak so scornfully of the others of the fearsome, who are really the pious and the well considered of God? This thought led me to no definite conclusion. A stone had fallen into the well, and the well was my young soul. And this business with Cain, the murder and the sign, was for a very long time, the point from which my seekings after knowledge, my doubts, my criticism took their departure. I noticed that the other boys had also occupied themselves a good deal with Damian. I had not told anyone of his version of the story of Cain, but he appeared to interest the others as well. At least, many rumors concerning the new boy became current. If only I knew all of them, each would help to throw fresh light on him, each would serve to interpret him. I only remember the first rumor was that Damien's mother was very rich. It was also said that she never went to church, nor the son either. Another rumor had it that they were Jews, but they could just as easily have been in secret Mohammedans. Furthermore, tales were told of Max Damien's strength. So much was certain that the strongest boy in his firm, who challenged him to a fight, and who, at his refusal, branded him coward, suffered a terrible humiliation at his hands. Those who were there said that Damien had simply taken him by the nape of the neck with one hand and had brought such a pressure to bear that the boy went white and afterwards crawled away, and that of several days he was unable to use his arm. For a whole evening, a rumor even ran that he was dead. For a time, everything was asserted and believed, everything that was exciting and wonderful. Then there was a satiety of rumors for a while. A little later, new one circulated, which asserted that Damien had intimate relations with girls and knew everything. Meanwhile, my affair with Frank Cromer took its inevitable course. I could not get away from him, for although he left me in peace for days or together, I was still bound to him. In my dreams, he lived as my shadow, and thus my fantasy credited him with actions which he did not in reality do. So that in dreams, I was absolutely his slave. I lived in these dreams. I was always a deep dreamer more than in reality. These shadowy conceptions wasted my strength and my life force. I often dreamed, among other things, that Cromer ill treated me, that he spat on me and knelt on me, and what was worse, that he led me to commit grave crimes, or rather, I was not led but simply forced through his powerful influence. The most terrible of these dreams, from which I woke up half mad, presented itself as a murderous attack on my father. Cromer whetted a knife and put it in my hand as we were standing behind the tree of a lane and lying in wait for someone whom I knew not. But when someone came along and Cromer through a pressure of the arm informed me that this was the man whom I was to stab. It turned out to be my father. Then I woke up. With all these troubles, I still thought a great deal about Cain and Abel, but much less about Damien. It was strangely enough in a dream that he first came in contact with me again. I dreamed once more of assault and ill treatment which I suffered, but instead of Cromer, this time it was Damien who knelt upon me, and which was quite new and profoundly impressive. Everything that I suffered resistingly and in torment at the hand of Cromer, I suffered willingly from Damien, with a feeling which was composed as much of joy as of fear. I had this dream twice. Then Cromer occupied his old position in my thoughts. For a long time, I have not been able to separate what I experienced in these dreams from what I underwent in reality. But in any case, my evil relation with Cromer took its course and was by no means at an end. When I had at last, by petty thefts, paid the boy the sum owed. No, for now he knew of these thefts, as he always asked me where the money came from, and I was more in his hands than ever. He frequently threatened to tell my father everything, and my terror was scarcely as great as the profound regret that I had not myself done than that in the beginning. However miserable as I was, did not repent of everything, at least not always, and sometimes felt I thought that things could not have helped being as they were. The hand of fate was upon me, and it was useless to want to break away. I conjecture that my parents suffered not a little in these circumstances. A strange spirit had come over me. I no longer fitted into a community which had been so intimate and for which I often felt a maddening homesickness, as for a lost paradise. I was treated particularly by mother more like a sick person than like a miserable wretch, but the actual state of affairs I was able to observe best in conduct of my two sisters. It was quite evident from their behavior, which was very considerate and which yet caused me endless pain, that I was a sort of person possessed who was more to be pitied than blamed for his condition, but yet in whom evil had taken up residence. I felt that I was being prayed for in a different way from formerly and realized the fruitlessness of these prayers. I often felt burning within me an intense longing for relief, an ardent desire for a full confession, and yet I realized in advance that I should not be able to tell everything to father and mother properly. In explanation of my conduct, I knew that I should be received in a friendly way, that much consideration and passion would be shown to me, but that I should not be completely understood. The whole affair would have been looked upon as a sort of backsliding, whereas it was really the work of destiny. I know that many people will not believe that a child scarcely 11 years old could feel thus, but I am not relating my affairs for their benefit. My narration is for those who know mankind better, the grown up person who has learned to convert part of his feeling into thoughts, feels the absence of these ideas in a child, and comes to believe that the experience are likewise lacking. But they have seldom been so vivid, and not often in my life have I suffered as keenly as then. One rainy day I was ordered by my tormentor to Castle Place, and there I stood, waiting and digging my feet in the wet chestnut leaves, which were still falling regularly from the black dripping branches. Money I had none, but I had brought with me 2 pieces of cake that I had stolen in order at least to be able to give Cromer something. I had long since been accustomed to stand about in any old corner waiting for him, often for a very long time, and I put up with the unalterable. Cromer came at last. That day he did not stay long. He poked me several times in the ribs, laughed, took the cake, and even offered me a mouldy cigarette, which, however, I did not accept. He was more friendly than usual. "Oh," he said as he went away, "before I forget, next time you can bring your sister along, the elder one. What is her name? Now tell the truth." I did not understand and gave no answer. I only looked at him wonderingly. "Don't you get me? You must bring your sister along." "But Cromer, that won't do. I must not do that, and besides, she wouldn't come." I thought this was only another pretext for vexing me. He often did that, requiring me to do something impossible and so terrifying me. And often, after humiliating me, he would be by degrees become more tractable. I then had to bury myself off with money or with some other gift. This time he was quite different. He was really not at all angry at my refusal. "Well," he said airily, "you will think about it, won't you? I should like to make your sister's acquaintance. It will not be so difficult. You simply take her out for a walk and then I come along. Tomorrow I will whistle for you and then we can talk more about it." When he had gone, a glimpse of the meaning of his request dawned on me. I was still quite a child, but I knew by hearsay that boys and girls, when they were somewhat older, did things which were forbidden, things of a secret and scandalous nature. And now I should also have to. It was suddenly quite clear to me how monstrous it was. I immediately resolved never to do that, but I scarcely dared think of what would happen in that case and how Cromer would revenge himself on me. A new torment began. I began. I had not yet been tortured enough. I walked disconsolately across the empty square, my hands in my pocket, fresh torments, a new servitude. Suddenly, a fresh, deep voice called to me. I was terrified and began to run on. Someone ran after me, a hand gripped me from behind. It was Max Demian. I let myself be taken prisoner. I surrendered. It's you? I said uncertainly. You frightened me so. He looked at me, and never had his glance been more like that of an adult, of a superior and penetrating person. For a long time past we had not spoken with one another. I'm sorry, he said in his courteous and at the same time very determined manner. But listen, you must not let yourself be frightened like that. Oh, that can happen sometimes. So it appears. But look here. If you shrink like that from someone who hasn't hurt you, then this someone begins to think. It makes him curious. He wonders what can be the matter. The somebody thinks to himself, how awfully frightened you are, and he thinks further. One is only like that when one is terrified. Cowards are always frightened, but I believe you aren't really a coward. Ain't I right? Of course, you aren't a hero either. There are things of which you are afraid. There are also people of whom you are afraid. And that should never be. No one should ever be afraid of other people. You aren't afraid of me. Or are you, perhaps? Oh no, of course not. There you see, but there are people you are afraid of. I don't know. Let me go. What do you want of me? He kept pace with me. I was going quicker with the idea of escaping. I felt his look directed on me from the side. Just assume, he began again, that I mean well with you. In any case, you need not be afraid of me. I would very much like to try an experiment with you. It's funny and you can learn something that is very useful. Listen, I often practice an art which is called mind reading. There's no witchcraft in it, but it seems very peculiar if one doesn't know how to do it. You can surprise people very much with it. Well, let us try it. I like you, or I interest myself in you, and I would like to find out what your real feelings are. I've already made the first step towards doing that. I have frightened you. You are then easily frightened. There are things and people of whom you are afraid. Why is it? One needs to be afraid of no one. If you fear somebody, then it is due to the fact that the person that he has power of you over you. For example, you have done something wrong and the person knows it, then he has power over you. Do you get me? It's clear, isn't it? I looked helplessly into his face, which was serious and prudent as always, and kind as well, but without any tenderness. His features were rather severe. Righteousness or something akin lay therein. I was not conscious of what was happening. He stood like a magician before me. Have you understood? He questioned again. I nodded. I could not speak. I told you, mind reading looked rather strange, but the process is quite natural. I could, for example, tell you more or less exactly what you thought about me when I once told you the story of Cain and Abel, but that has nothing to do with the matter in hand. I also think it possible that you have dreamed of me, but let's leave that out. You are a clever kid. Most of them are so stupid. I like talking now and then with a clever fellow whom I can trust. You have no objection, have you? Oh no, only I don't understand. Let's keep to our old experiment. We have found that the boy S is easily frightened and he is afraid of somebody. He apparently shares a secret with this other person which causes him much disquietude. Is that about right? As in a dream, I lay under the influence of his voice, of his personality. I only nodded. Was not a voice talking there which could only come from myself, which knew all in a better, clearer way than I myself? Damien gave me a powerful slap on the shoulder. Just right then, I thought so. Now, just one more question. Do you know the name of the boy who has just gone away? I sank back. He had the key to my secret. This secret which twisted back inside me as if it did not want to see light. What sort of fellow? There was no one there except myself. He laughed. Don't be afraid to tell me, said he laughingly. What's his name? I whispered. Do you mean Frank Cromer? He nodded contentedly. Bravo, bravo! You're a smart chap. We shall be good friends yet. But now I must tell you something else. This Cromer, or whatever his name is a nasty fellow. His face tells me he's a rascal. What do you think? Oh, yes, I sobbed out. He's nasty. He's devil. But he must not know anything. For God's sake, he must not know anything. Do you know him? Does he know you? Don't worry, he's gone. And he doesn't know me. Not yet. But I should like to make his acquaintance. He goes to the public school? Yes. In which standard? In the fifth. But don't say anything to him. Please don't say anything to him. Don't worry, nothing will happen to you. I suppose you wouldn't like to tell me a little more about this fellow Cromer. I can't. No, let me go. He was silent for a while. It's a pity, he said. We might have been able to carry the experiment still further, but I don't want to bother you. You know, don't you, that it is not right for you to be afraid of him? Such fear quite undermines us. You must get rid of it. You must get rid of it if you want to become a real man. Do you understand? Certainly, you are right. You are quite right, but it won't do. You don't know. You have seen that I know a lot, more than you thought. Do you owe him any money? Yes, I do, but that isn't the essential point. I can't tell. I can't. It won't help matters then. If I give you the amount you owe him, I could very well let you have it. No, no, that is not the point. And please, don't say anything to anybody, not a word. You're making me miserable. Rely on me, Sinclair. Later you can share your secrets with me. Never, never, I exclaimed vehemently. Just as you please. I only mean perhaps you will tell me something more later on. Only of your own free will, you understand? Surely you don't think I shall act like Cromer? Oh no, but you don't even know anything about it. Absolutely nothing. But I think about it, and I shall never act like Cromer, believe me. Besides, you don't owe me anything. We remained a long time silent, and I became more tranquil. But Damien's knowledge became more and more of a puzzle to me. I'm going home now, he said. And in the rain, he drew his coat more closely about him. I should only like to repeat one thing to you since we have gone so far in the matter. You ought to get rid of this fellow. If there is nothing else to be done, then kill him. It would impress me and please me. If you were to do that, besides, I would help you. I was again terrified. I suddenly remembered the story of Cain. I had an uncanny feeling and I began to cry softly. So much that was weird seemed to surround me. So much that was weird seemed to surround me. All right, Max Damien said smilingly. Go home now. We will put things square. Although murder would have been the simplest. In such matters, the simplest way is always the best. You aren't in good hands with your friend Cromer. I came home and it seemed to me as if I had been away a year. Everything looked different. Between myself and Cromer, there now stood something like future freedom, something like hope. I was lonely no longer, and then I realized for the first time how terribly lonely I had been for weeks and weeks. And I immediately recollected what I had on several occasions turned over in my mind, that a confession to my parents would afford me relief and yet would not quite liberate me. Now I had almost confessed to another, to a stranger, and as if a strong perfume had been wafted to me, sensed the presentiment of salvation. Still, my fear was far from being overcome, and I was still prepared for long and terrible mental wrestlings with my evil genius, so it was all the more remarkable to me that everything passed off so very secretly and quietly. Cromer's whistle remained absent from our house for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a whole week. I dared not believe my senses and lay inward on the watch to see whether he would not suddenly stand before me, just at the moment when I should expect him no longer. But he was, and remained away. Distrustful of my new freedom, I still could not bring myself to believe in it wholeheartedly, until at last I met Frank Cromer. He was coming down the street, straight in my direction. When he saw me, he drew himself together, twisted his features in a brutal grimace, and turned away without more ado, in order to avoid meeting me. That was a wonderful moment for me. My enemy ran away from me. My devil was afraid of me. Surprise and joy shook me through and through. In a few days, Damien showed himself once again. He waited for me outside the school. Hello, I said. Good morning, Sinclair. I only wanted to hear how you are getting on. Cromer leaves you in peace, doesn't he? Did you manage that? But how did you do it? How? I don't understand it. He hasn't come near me. Splendid. If he should come again, I don't think he will, but he's a cheeky fellow. Then simply tell him to remember Damien. But what does it but what does it all mean? Have you had a fight with him and thrashed him? No, I'm not so keen on that. I simply talked to him, as I did to you, and I made it clear to him that it is to his own advantage to leave you in peace. Oh, but you haven't given him any money? No, kid, you have already tried that way yourself. I attempted to pump him on the matter, but he disengaged himself. The old embarrassed feeling concerning him came over me, an odd mixture of gratitude and shyness, of admiration and fear, of affection and inward resistance. I had the intention of seeing him again soon, and then I wanted to talk more about everything, about the Kane affair as well, but I did not see him. Gratitude is not one of the virtues in which I believe, and to require it of a child would seem to me wrong. So I do not wonder very much at the complete ingratitude which I evinced towards Max Demian. Today I believe positively that I should have been ruined for life if he had not freed me from Cromer's clutch. At that time, also, I already felt this release as the greatest event of my young life. But I left the deliverer on one side as soon as he had accomplished the miracle. As I have said, ingratitude seems to me nothing strange. Solely the lack of curiosity I envied is odd. I evinced is odd. How was it possible that I could continue for a single day my quiet mode of life without coming near to the secrets with which Damian had brought me in contact? How could I restrain the desire to hear more about Cain, more about Cromer, more about the thought reading? It is scarcely incomprehensible, and yet it is so. I suddenly saw myself extricated from the demoniacal toil, saw again the world lying bright and cheerful before me. I was no longer subject to paroxysm of fear. The curse was broken. I was no longer a tormented and condemned creature. I was a schoolboy again. My temperament sought to regain its equilibrium and tranquility as quickly as possible, and so I took pains above all things to put behind me all that had been ugly and menacing, and to forget it. The whole long story of my guilt, of my terrifying anxiety, slipped from my memory wonderfully quick, apparently without having left behind any scars or impressions whatsoever. The fact that I likewise tried as quickly to forget my helper and deliverer, I understand today as well. Instinctively, my mind turned from the damning recollection of my awful servitude under Cromer, and I sought to recover my former happy, contented mental outlook to regain that lost paradise which opened once more to me. The bright father and mother world, where my sisters dwelt in the fragrant atmosphere of purity, in loving kindness such as God had extended to Abel. On the very next day after my short conversation with Damian, when I was at last fully convinced of my newly born freedom and feared no longer a relapse to my condition of slavery, I did what I had so often and so ardently desired to do. I confessed. I went to mother and showed her the little saving box with broken lock, filled with toy mark pieces instead of with real money, and I told her how long I had been in the thrall of an evil tormentor through my own guilt. She did not understand and everything, but she saw the money box, she saw my altered look, and heard my changed voice. She felt that I was healed and that I had been restored to her. And then, with lofty feelings, I celebrated my readmission into the family. The prodigal sons returned home. Mother took me to father. The story was repeated. Questions and exclamations of wonder followed in quick succession. But both parents stroked my hair and breathed deeply, as in relief from a long oppression. It was all lovely, like the stories I had read. All discords were resolved in a happy ending. I surrendered myself passionately to this harmonious state of affairs. I could not have enough of the idea that I was again free and trusted by my parents. I was a model boy at home and played more frequently than ever with my sisters. At prayers, I sang the dear old hymns with the blissful feeling of one converted and redeemed. It came straight from my heart. It was no lie this time. And yet, it was not at all as it should have been. And this is the point which alone can truly explain my forgetfulness of Damian. I ought to have made a confession to him. The confession would have been less touching and less specious, but for me it would have borne more fruit. I was now clinging fast to my former paradisical world. I had returned home and had been received in grace, but Damian belonged in no wise to this world. he did not fit into it. He also in a different way from Cromer, but nevertheless he was also a seducer. He too bound me to the second evil, bad world, and to this world I never wanted to hear anything more. I could not now, and I did not wish to give up Abel and help to glorify Cain. Now when I myself had again became an Abel. So much for the outward correlation of events, but inwardly it was like this. I had been freed from the hands of Cromer and the devil, but not through my own strength and effort. I had ventured a footing on the paths of the world, and they had been too slippery for me. Now that the grasp of a friendly hand had saved me, I ran back, without another glance round, to mother's lap, to the protecting, godly, and tender security of childhood. I made myself younger, more dependent on others, more childlike than I really was. I had to replace my dependence on Cromer by a new one, since I was powerless to strike out for myself. So I chose, in the blindness of my heart, the dependence on father or mother, on the old, beloved, bright world, on this world which I knew already was not the sole one. Had I not done this, I should have had to hold to Demian, to entrust myself to him. The fact that I did not appear to me then to be due to justifiable distrust of these strange ideas. In reality, it was due to nothing else than fear. For Damian would have required more of me than my parents, much more. By stimulation and exhortation, by scorn and irony, he would have tried to make me more independent. Alas, I know that today nothing in the world is so distasteful to a man as to go the way which leads him to himself. And yet, about half a year later, I could not resist the temptation to ask my father while we were out for a walk what was to be made of the fact that many people declared Cain to be better than Abel. He was much surprised and explained to me that this was a conception by no means novel. It had even emerged in the early Christian era and had been professed by sects, one of which was called the Cainites. But naturally, this foolish doctrine was nothing else than an attempt of the devil to undermine our belief. For if one believes that Cain was right and Abel was wrong, then it follows that God was erred, and that the God of the Bible is not the true and only God, but a false one. The Cainites really used to profess and preach something approximating this doctrine. But this heresy vanished from among mankind a long time ago, and he wondered the more that a school friend had been able to learn something on the subject. Nevertheless, he earnestly exhorted me not to let these ideas occupy my attention. That brings us to the end of chapter 2. We will continue with chapter 3 in our next reading. Bye bye for now. If you have any comments, any feedback, anything you want to ask, anything at all, you can reach out to me in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section of the YouTube channel. Bye bye for now. Take care and keep reading. If you have not subscribed yet, do subscribe, like and share. Bye.